couple of years ago, I saw two rather large men having an argument in the street in front of my house. After a couple of minutes, they drove off and went their separate ways. I didn't think anything of it until the next day when I get a knock on my door. Turns out that one of my roommates had been sleeping with a married woman, and her husband somehow found out where we lived and was at our house with a shotgun to kill the guy who banged his wife. The dude had a couple of priors that definitely lent the threat of some credibility. The man at the door was his dad, who told me that the argument was him talking his son down. He told me that he showed up as his son was getting out of the car. He asked me if I was the guy in question, and I said I wasn't. He said, "Oh, you're the roommate? He was going to kill you too." Turns out my other roommate had done some things with the young lady as well. The kicker is that I was home alone at the time. Basically, I unknowingly watched a man talk down my future murderer from my dining room window. When I was about 12 to 13 years old, I was waiting for my friends at the entrance to a large park in my city. While I waited, a van pulled up and a guy rolled down his window and asked me, "What are you up to?" To which I replied, "Waiting for my friends," as I paced back and forth slightly away from the van with each step. He said, "Where are they coming from?" And I answered, "From the metro." And he said, "Hop in, I can give you a lift there." Well, at this point I know he's a creeper, so I told him, "No thanks," and began to walk away, while he insisted I accept his lift. I left the park entrance and he pulled into the parking lot, did a U-turn, and drove out of the park along the road I was walking on. Having noticed what he was doing early on, I walked really fast to a hole in the fence of the park and climbed in. From that point, he'd have to do a 8 to 10 minute drive to get back to where I was. Met up with my friends a little bit later and told them the story. One night on my cousin's farm, me, my two cousins, and my two family friends were sitting on hay bales as it got dark, waiting for the coyotes to come out. Me and the two family friends decided it would be funny for one of us to throw a shoe to make some noise and then ditch my cousin on the hay bale. The four of us ran to the barn while my cousin stayed on the hay bales. We stayed in the barn for a good 30 minutes waiting for her to come and find us, but she didn't. We went to go check on her, but she wasn't there. We found her back inside the house. The creepy part was when we talked to her. She asked us which one of us had been running around banging on the fence. We got really confused because we had ran straight for the barn, so we asked her what she meant. Apparently she had seen a person sneaking around with a black sweatshirt on with the hood up and had taken a stick and hit it against the trough and the fence several times. She had thought it was us since we were all wearing black hoodies. We were certain she wasn't lying because she had asked us first and proudly declared it didn't scare her. The next day, while all five of us were out fishing, my uncle said there were two people walking around by the gravel pit near the hay bales who he thought was the two of us. We still don't know who was out there or what they were doing. My significant other was in an accident, which demolished her car. After the accident, we stored the car in our driveway with a tarp covering it until the insurance towed it. She was in Canada for a convention, which left me and the dogs alone at home for the weekend. When I got home from work, I thought it was a good idea to call my parents to catch up. The wind was intense that day and blew the tarp off the passenger side of the car. As I'm speaking with my parents, I decide to pull the tarp back over the car. I'm talking with my parents and listening to them describe their day when I hear a faint voice saying, "Hey." I have no idea where it is coming from until I look down. There's a man sitting in my car. I've never seen this man before, but he looks at me and asks, "Where's Dan and Isaac?" Now, I don't know either of these people, and I told him that I did not. I can see he has all of the personal items from the car in his lap. I start telling him that he needs to get out of the car and leave. Then I see the pepper spray in his hands, which was left by my significant other. I knew at that moment that my day would end with being pepper sprayed, so I tell my parents to call the cops. He steps out of the car asking, "Where's the ice?" I just tell him that he has the wrong place and grab the CD case out of his hands. He reaches for the pepper spray and I back up quick. He stops and says, "I'll be back, bro, just you watch." I watch him walk off, and for a brief moment he starts yelling at a tree down the street. The cops came and he was found up the road, but the officers could not find my stuff. The experience definitely freaked me out for the rest of the night. I worked at a campground over the summer, and I agreed to do security watch on the Tuesday after Labor Day. It's completely empty all day long, and we spend most of the day cleaning and repairing various items in the campground. It was also a family campground with tons of things to do like ziplining, paintballing, go-karting, and hiking. It was relatively large, approximately 50 square acres. Anyways, I'm doing security, which most likely consists of driving around in a golf cart and making sure people aren't doing anything. That night, a motion sensor went off on the upper loop, which had been out of use since July for renovations. Usually when a motion sensor goes off, it's a raccoon or a deer, but we have to check anyways. I make my way up to the motion sensor, which was going off constantly on my way up, and logged it in our notebook. When I got up there was this lady's voice singing in the middle of the night. I walk around and head towards it, which was a bad idea. There was this 40-something meth head in a dress walking around singing. She saw me and chased after me. I ran as fast as I could to the golf cart and took off down to the main office. I called the police, but they were going to be close to an hour. I stayed locked up in the office until they got there. She had paced around the front door and screamed at me the whole time. When they got there, they arrested her and we went up to the same loop where she was to look for more. I swear, looking for more meth heads was more terrifying than being chased by her. She had been living in one of the yurts we had yet to get to for over 2 months. She looked like a witch. The yurt was destroyed and we ended up burning it down. I'm sure most of this thread will be about spooky or paranormal experiences. I've had some sleep paralysis experiences that were creepy, but by far the creepiest experience I've had was just another human being having a straight up lack of boundaries. I was 18, in college, and living with my boyfriend in our first apartment. He had left early for an early class and I had the day off, so I was sleeping in. I awoke to a man I didn't know sitting on the end of my bed staring at me. When he saw me wake up, he said, "It's time to get up now," and just kept looking at me. I was trying to figure out if I was awake or dreaming and if there was anything I could do to avoid getting raped and murdered. He just kept sitting and looking. Figured out I was awake and also remembered that I was sleeping naked, so I didn't want to get up unless he made a move. After what felt like a lifetime of silence, but was probably only a minute, he said it again. "It's time to get up now." I said okay, still too shocked and scared to figure out that I could ask him who he was or tell him to leave, or start screaming for help. He got up and walked out of the room and I heard voices in my kitchen. He left my bedroom door open when he left, so I still didn't want to get up because of the naked thing. After a few minutes, I built up the courage to wrap a blanket around myself, grab some clothes, and dash to the bathroom. As I passed the door, I saw him standing in the kitchen doorway and just staring into my room, watching me run for the bathroom. I got dressed and began to slowly make my way towards my cell phone. I had to pass him again in my kitchen where I could now hear 3 male voices in order to get where it was plugged in. As I passed, I saw that 2 of the men were in plumber outfits and half of my kitchen was soaking wet. Turns out my neighbor upstairs had burst pipe and these men were here to fix it and needed access to the problem pipe through my ceiling. The man sitting on my bed was with the realty company and had let them in. He says they knocked, but I never heard it and no one had called either myself or my boyfriend to say they were coming over. I have no idea why he thought that was an appropriate way to wake me up or why he didn't feel the need to explain who he was or what was going on. Needless to say, we broke our lease and found somewhere else to live after that. A couple of years ago, I went on my first hunting trip. My girlfriend's dad and I arrived around midnight and it was pitch black out there in the country. While he was inside setting up the cabin, I was outside unpacking the truck by myself. All of a sudden, I hear a man's voice from the abandoned barn about 50 feet from me, saying, "Come over here. Psst, come over here." I stopped and looked over there. I was pretty much frozen in disbelief. Then he continued, "Hey," I said, "come over here. Come on." And then it stopped. I dropped my stuff, walked calmly into the cabin, and asked my girlfriend's dad how close the nearest house is. I was told it was about half a mile down the road. After I told him what just happened, he didn't seem to believe me, but took his gun out and he kinda just called over to the area, but there was no response. It kinda freaked me out. On a side note, later that night while I was trying to sleep, I heard a loud crash come from the living room and heard him yell, "What the fuck?" So of course I assumed the worst, that the creepy man broke in and was attacking him. I ran out of my room ready for a fight, but found him sitting on a broken heap of wood. Apparently he sat in an old wooden chair and was too heavy, so it broke on him. I had a detached retina at a young age and had to have surgery to repair it. The surgery ended up being around 7 hours long. I remember waking up in the middle of surgery and seeing the reflection off the monitor above me of the medical team working on my eye. I didn't feel any pain, just the complete awareness of the surgery being performed. I remember someone placing their hand firmly on my forehead and saying, "He woke up, prepare another dose." Someone else came into the picture and I went cold again and fell asleep. The creepy part is, each anniversary of the surgery I have night terrors and generally wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. I hate that night because no matter what I do, my body recalls the surgery, and I always wake up dreaming that someone is performing surgery on me, but I am strapped down. I've tried staying up all night when I was 22. I eventually just passed out and had the worst episode where I had sleep paralysis and hallucinated. The surgery was originally supposed to last 4 to 5 hours, but additional work was done and minor complications occurred. The doctors were very good and all still check up on me. I was one of the youngest detached retinas that the team had and get Christmas cards from them still. I don't know why it happens and I can't explain it other than my body just knows. June 17th. I guess it could be similar to phantom leg or something where the body recalls something that isn't there. Tonight is the night. A lot of you have been asking for updates, so here's the plan. Get off work and do some chores around the house. Get the little one to bed and read her 4 stories. Feed my fish, take some painkillers, drink scotch, and play World of Tanks all night on Xbox One. I will update in the morning to see how it goes. I went to bed around 2 a.m. because I couldn't keep my eyes any longer. I woke up around 5:15 with another terrible nightmare. I think it may be a combination of pills and booze, but the dream was replaced with zombies instead of doctors hanging over me. The zombies were clawing at my eye trying to get it out of my head, and I could feel the pressure as they pulled at it. My fiance is a light sleeper and a nurse, so she has that caring mindset, so she woke up. So luckily it didn't last long, as she was gently nudging me to snap out of it, but the bed was soaked in sweat. I didn't sleep the rest of the night and went to watch my fish swim around until everyone woke for Father's Day. A few years ago, my best friend and I went to Adams Morgan, a strip of bars and clubs in DC. It was a Saturday night, so the whole area was packed with people, and we ended up having to park several blocks away in some back alley. As we're walking down the alley, I turn around and notice a man with a backpack several yards behind us. I don't think much of it and we keep walking. A few seconds later, I look behind us again, and now he's a lot closer, so I start speed walking. When I look back again, this man is running at full speed towards us, so I grab my BFF's hand and bolt. We start running full speed down this alley with this guy right behind us and end up running into busy DC traffic, nearly getting hit by multiple cars. It was like a scene out of a movie. We somehow made it across the busy 6-lane street unscathed and watched the man across the street menacingly stare us down before running away, back up the alley. To this day, we still don't know what that was about. And to add, at the time we were two 20-year-old girls. Yes, we did go back to the car about 4 to 5 hours later, but since we ran, we both never saw what street we parked on. We only had a general idea of the area we parked in. We ended up having to use a cab and drove around DC at 3 a.m. for almost an hour looking for my car. We eventually found it, and thank goodness it wasn't broken into. We asked the cab driver to not leave until we got in and drove off. After all of that, we decided to just party in Federal Hill in Baltimore. We never had problems there. When I was 15, I went into town for my first day doing some charity work. I was early, so I sat down on a bench in town center for a bit. Someone approached me, introduced himself, said he just moved there. I briefly introduced myself and we talked a bit about local stuff. He mentioned he was 26, which weirded me out a bit. He was on his phone and suddenly I heard the shutter sound as it faced me. I freaked out and demanded to know why he was taking a photo. He denied it and claimed to be taking a photo of the scenery in a market town with no scenery. Annoyed and creeped out, I just left with no explanation and went to a charity shop where I spent 6 hours working. So 6 hours later, I left the shop and started heading home. Suddenly I heard my name being shouted from behind me. It was the creep again. I said to him to leave me alone, but he wouldn't listen and said he won't let me walk home alone. I was yelling at him, telling him to go away, and I started walking quicker and he kept up. In the end, I just ran for my life and I made it home safely and never saw him again. This happened to me about a month ago in rural Michigan. I was out in a rural area on a big 5,000 acre patch of state land doing some rabbit hunting by myself. I'd been walking for 2 to 3 hours and hadn't seen a damn thing, so I decided to turn around and start making my way back to where I'd parked my car. When I got back to the main trail, I basically had to walk about a mile east and then take a left and head another 2-ish miles north to get to my car. As I'm walking east, I start to get this really uneasy feeling. Everything is a bit quieter than usual. Quiet even for a day with a decent amount of snow on the ground. The eastbound trail before the turn is a lot of small fields off to the side and hills up until a flat final stretch. As I get up to one of the last hills, I look to my left at a field for a second in case I saw any rabbits or coyotes. By the time I turned my head back straight, there was a guy straight in front of me about 100 yards walking away from me. Something about him didn't settle right with me. He had no hiking, hunting, or camping gear, just a long sleeve shirt and dirty jeans with a beanie hat on. He was walking really strange, not really picking up his feet, just sort of dragging them along, kicking up snow like how a kid would if he was bored. But this was a large grown man. On top of all of this was later in the day, almost sundown, and there were no other cars in the area that I'd parked when I'd got there, which was the only reasonable way into the trail, so no way this guy had driven there suddenly to take a quick hike. I keep walking a little slower, and all of a sudden the guy stops, turns his head halfway, and I can tell he's looking at me. He turns his head back and just bolts running. This startled the shit out of me, and I stopped walking. I know there's something seriously wrong with this guy, so I stopped and swapped out the birdshot in my shotgun to a few buckshot shells I always carried in my backpack just in case. Kept walking forward cautiously, and once I got to the turn in the trail, I looked down the trail, and the guy is nowhere to be seen. The final stretch of the trail goes about 2 miles and is completely flat. There's absolutely no way he could have made it all the way down the trail by the time I got to the spot, even if he was Usain Bolt. I could see in the snow that he was wearing heavy boots. It's a nice trail, but the sides are covered with thick brush and deep forest. So basically now I knew that this guy was hiding off to the side in the brush somewhere. That had to have been the absolute longest, most unsettling walk I've made in my entire life. I tried to stay with his boot trail in the snow to try and get an idea of where he was, but it was lost in old prints from whatever group had hunted the trail that morning. I racked a shell in the shotgun as loud as I possibly could in hopes that he'd hear it, but that didn't really comfort me that much when I was walking near extra heavy thickets on the side of the tall berms where he could have been. Plus, with the snow, it's hard to hear anything moving around. Even once I got to my car, I was really in the middle of nowhere surrounded by more forest. So I kept the gun loaded with me as I got into the car, so I didn't have to unload it in my trunk and be exposed before I got in the car and locked it. That whole walk, I just kept repeating the old biblical passage. As I walk through the valley, in the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, in my head pretty uncontrollably. Something just felt very, very wrong, and I'm never going hunting there again alone. Three years ago, I admitted myself into the mental wing of the hospital and was put on 48-hour suicide watch. It was about 3 a.m. when I finally finished giving them all of my belongings and had a temporary cot to sleep on while waiting for a room to open up. Mind you, these cots are only separated by a sheet, and there are several unpredictable people around me who were also being admitted. One of these people was a guy my age, about half a foot taller than me, and had this wild look to him. He reminded me a lot of Gary Busey, which scared the shit out of me. Apparently he'd taken a ton of mushrooms, dropped acid, and went on Everclear drinking binge before the cops were called and brought him in. About an hour after falling asleep from Valium that the nurse gave me, I start waking up out of this semi-lucid, groggy, blurred state to see the dim light above me eclipsed by a figure. I assumed it was a doctor or a nurse, but as my vision became clearer, my heart began to pound. The wildly pulled hair, wide open manic eyes, and full-toothed smile was inches above my face. I felt as if I were paralyzed, hoping I could sink deeper into the cot while he raised his hand, crooked and wretched like a claw, closer to me. Within seconds, 2 utterly massive security guards sprinted over, one running so fast that he inadvertently tackled the guy to the floor from having too much momentum to stop himself. That was by far the most terrifying experience I'd ever had. The rest of my time there, however, something else disturbing happened. Our actual rooms had double doors with small glass panes on each one. At night, the doors would close and the security would patrol the hallway. For those 2 nights, I would hear the routine footsteps of the guard as he walked past in his heavy boots, but I also heard and saw something entirely different. I began to notice light, rapid tiptoeing in between each round the guard made in my section of the wing square layout. The guard's boots would pass, but a minute later I would hear, I still wish I didn't look. I wish I would have kept my head buried under the covers in that room. I slowly turned my head and raised the sheet until I could just barely see out of my one eye. As I looked at the door, I noticed nothing but the shine of two eyes staring at me. It was so dark I couldn't see the face behind them, just eyes. After a minute, horrified, they would swiftly go away, giggling and laughing under their breath until I heard a click of the door closing down the hall. Yeah, that creeped me out all right. That was more than enough motivation to seek out a therapist, and thankfully, I've been depression and anxiety free ever since. Paramedic here. We were called at 2 a.m. to a little town in the hills away from our area. Someone had called with chest pain and needed an ambulance. It took us a while to get up there because the road was unsealed and weaved around the mountainside. We drove into the town and there were no lights on at all except for a phone box lit up on the street. The address was actually a little ways out of the other side of the town, about 3 kilometers or so, but when we got to the street we found no street numbers. It was very hard to see where we were going, but we soon found a shack hidden behind some trees where we think the address was, so we pulled up and knocked on the door. No answer, and so I knocked again. After about a minute, a woman stepped in from the edge of the door all dressed in white, not saying a word, and standing with her nose pressed against the screen and wide-eyed. I asked if she had called for an ambulance and she just shook her head. I asked if anyone else had, and I could see another figure in white standing further back in the house. No lights were turned on and no one said a word, so we got back into the ambulance and kept searching. We drove to the end of the road, which ended in a property with a huge house that had about 30 windows and a yard full of old cars. No lights were on in the house, and we tried to call and radio our communication center, but we were unable to get to them in any way due to the location. We drove back into the town and decided to use the phone booth to call communications about the job. We found a few coins, and feeling a little creeped out, we got a hold of them. They told us they had no further information for us and to have another look around. As directed, we drove back down to the road and had another look. We couldn't find anything matching the house description we were given and even had trouble finding driveways. Finally, we got all the way to the end of the street and looked up into the huge house at the end of the road. This time, a single light was on in the front room, and standing looking out away from us into the darkness was a figure, all dressed in black, with a huge pointed hood. We waited, terrified, to see if this was the called, and he didn't move despite us doing everything to get his attention. After what seemed like forever, my partner started to scream, and we drove as fast as we could away from the house, up the road, through town, and back down the curling road till we got to the highway. Both of us were shaken by the experience and didn't know what to make of it. Once we arrived back in mobile phone range, we called the communication center to explain that we couldn't find the patient despite further searches. The lady on the other end of the phone explained that they were unable to reach the caller again despite trying, and ended up tracing the call to the phone booth we had called them from in town. I hung up the phone and we both sat silently for the ride home, before my partner asked me if I believed in the devil. I told her I don't know. As always, thank you so much for listening, and please hit that like and subscribe button.